Andrew, welcome back to the show.
It's great to be here. I think it's been about 2 years since we did
Yeah,
our last conversation together.
I went back. I was looking at. I was like, when did we record the last show? I'm like, oh my God, 2 years, and 2 years in the world of data is like, I don't know.
It's an eternity. Yeah. So we, like from the technology perspective, we've actually, let's see, in those 2 years, we've probably made about 100 new releases, new iterations of our software over that time. And so imagine like, getting 100 new versions of your car in the course of 2 years. Technology just moves that fast.
Yeah, no, it's funny because I have this conversation with people regularly of like, well, is the software done? I'm like, listen, it's software. It's never done, right?
No. Yeah, and so while it certainly depends, I think, on how the software is deployed. I mean, there's, as a guy who's built a lot of software systems I've worked on, for example, early in my career, large-scale telephony systems, the software systems that power the nation's telephone calls. And that's an example where you do a bunch of work, you do a bunch of testing, you deploy it, and you don't touch it in some cases for years. Aircraft are very similar, right? Like you tend not to make those changes. You would, for example, the software that powers your X-ray machine, you probably don't want that to change that often. But there are places where, of course, you can dynamically change software, even multiple times a day, right? Historically, that's been more in web-based applications, right? If you go back to a website and you reopen your web browser, that software can change, and it's at very little risk. And because of that, you can actually increase the velocity of trying new things and trying new products and seeing what works. And that sort of philosophy, that rapid iteration, is something we've brought to the drug discovery landscape, where our software stack, which is what we use in the discovery process internally, we are changing that thing daily. And then we ultimately get it to a release that we use with our discovery team. But we are rapidly iterating that product. It's been over hundreds of iterations, hundreds of software releases. And every time it's a small experiment, right? We're going to make this change to our algorithms or data sources or that sort of thing, and see whether or not, like, do the predictions improve, right? Are we actually making a new discovery, or are we coming up with something that is more likely to be efficacious and safe? And we have some digital tests to discover those things. And that allows us to just move so fast, right? From the computational perspective, as opposed to iterating, in the physical world, right? We have an idea and you run a wet lab experiment, and that can take months, and you learn that one nugget of information over the course of a very long time, as opposed to the course of an afternoon.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because I'm sure that anybody from pharma now is like, a zillion questions are going through their head of like, how do you check this? How do you know that? How do you, but let's step back for a second. So 2 years ago, if my memory serves me correctly, you were sort of doing more services oriented work, right? Testing what, you had built out. And now you've made this, what looks like the much stronger pivot that we talked about 2 years ago, to your own products. And how was that pivot, and why did you need to make that pivot, in a sense?
Yeah, no, it's interesting that's how people have seen it externally, because internally, like from my point of view, our vision, our plans, really actually nothing has changed. But what has changed over the years is, as we have more success, we have the permission, if you will, to just gather more resources. And so in the early days of the company, we used our discovery engine to come up with new ideas. And what I mean by new ideas is our output from the technology is a new hypothesis, new understanding of biology. We typically go after a complex disease where pathogenesis is not very well understood. And so as a result, we're coming up with first-in-class solutions, right? This is biology that's not been tested in that disease before. And of course, it comes coupled with a molecule, with some chemistry to test out those ideas. And so our initial programs were taking the output of the software with very little, in some cases, no wet lab experimentation whatsoever. And then licensing that knowledge, not necessarily a service deal, but upfronts, milestones, royalties, the typical pharma deal, to a pharmaceutical company who has the development team to then screen those molecules down, identify a lead, do the medicinal chemistry, all the traditional work that comes post-discovery to turn something from early chemistry into a product. And so we've been doing those deals for many years. But part of what we're very interested in, right, which is actually meeting unmet medical need, excuse me, and getting products to patients is all about the time, right? And so it's very time consuming to sign up pharmas, to go through a diligence process. And in some cases, the time it took to negotiate the deal, we could have actually gotten something to IND. Like that's how much time it takes.
Yeah.
And so we sort of recognize, like what are our pharma partners doing that we can't do, right? And that's about preclinical execution. Which, to be clear, I think when we were speaking 2 years ago, I know we were running preclinical studies on our own. We had that, but some of the other pieces around development we didn't have as a team. So these days, a couple years later, we have new people in the company. So now our head of R&D is Mark Eller, who wasn't with us back then. And so Mark, for those who don't recognize his name, he formerly was the head of R&D at Jazz Pharmaceuticals. He was there for about a dozen years and saw it from its early days through multiple FDA approvals. And he's got a number of products, probably Allegra is the one he's personally most famous for, that he's brought to the approval process that make billions per year. And so now that expertise is driving our R&D process, right? And so we're going beyond just the discovery and into the development. And we've also brought on people like Anjali Pandey, who formerly was the head of chemistry at Portola Therapeutics. Most recently was CSO at Bridge Bio. Those guys had a very nice IPO recently. And so she's got, geez Louise, I think over 60 patents to her name in the chemistry space, multiple products she's brought to approval as well. And so she's leading the effort, to take these early molecules, perform the med chemistry on them, and get them into, sort of the pharmaceutical product you would expect to go into the clinic. So we've been pulling those resources into the company, and now, relying a little less on our pharmaceutical partners to do the development for us. And we continue to do those deals. We have the ability to go after more diseases, and we have the resources to pursue ourselves. So we continue to do deals like that where we hand off the discovery to others. But nonetheless, we've got about a dozen programs now internally that we're developing on our own, using our resources and using CROs.
Now, how quickly do you, because of the engine and the capabilities, right? How when you're trying to explain time frame to someone, how do you frame it of how much faster the system can get you to something that looks like you should go after, and then actually helping, design a molecule and so on?
Yeah, well, we these days we say it saves years. We used to be a little more granular on that. But the reason is it really depends on the disease area and sort of what the starting point is. And so for us, as I was mentioning earlier, we go after complex disease where we think there's not only an unmet medical need, but we believe where discovery of new biology can really unlock, some opportunity for new therapy. And so if you look at the traditional approach of, coming up essentially with a new target, and I want to be clear, like we don't go to the literature and find a target and then, start developing.
Right.
Rather, we collect a bunch of data and we discover those targets ourselves. I mean, if you look back, like the heyday of big pharma, right, in like the 70s and 80s, this is what they did, right? Like they discovered new biology, they came up with new targets, they came up with some bioassays and that sort of thing to try out, a bunch of chemistry, hypothesis screen, right? And eventually whittle that down to some hits that they'd move forward. Like all that work from the traditional sense. And by the way, like not many people do that anymore, certainly not under one roof like we do. And the reason is, as you just identified, is it's just so time consuming to go through each of those processes, because the traditional approach is to do a lot of basic science and literature search and, forming hypotheses. And it's a long road to get to the point where you've completed that first high throughput screen and have some hits. And so we do all of that in computation, right? And so that saves you years. And I would say some of the people go, well, does it really save years? There's certainly companies that will in-license a molecule, or they'll take something that other people have started and they're it's being handed off to them, or they're pulling something in from an academic lab or whatever. They've read about a target in a paper recently, so they've got a head start, right? So that's maybe where there's a debate on the year saving. But I'm talking about like the old school approach of we're gonna just take all the existing knowledge about the disease and sort of set aside and see if we can't make some new discoveries about the biology, and that's the starting point, right? And
right.
If you think of it from that that perspective, where I think the real opportunity is in terms of making a big difference in going after something new. That is something for sure we're saving years in the process in.
Yeah, I mean, I've had, discussions with Joel Dudley about like, okay, let's put all the data in and let's look at what the data is showing us and the direction and hypotheses that we can then go chase down, that we in our, even the human brain is an amazing instrument, but there's way too many data points to look at simultaneously.
Yeah, look, for me to keep three things in my head is a good day. I mean, to look at billions of points of information, and not only that, but to figure out like what's a false positive, right? Like what's a coincidence versus what's signal. You're right. That's not something the human brain does very well, certainly at that scale. And so, we're looking for the patterns that represent signal versus the patterns that represent coincidence, if you will. And that's not something that humans can easily do, where they can look at, massive, troves of information and try to draw those parallels, especially when a lot of the information we're actually processing doesn't really lend itself to like giving you an answer, right? Part of it is going through it and figuring out what's relevant and not, and most of it, of course, is not relevant, right? It's as Mark often says, it's like looking for a needle in a haystack, right? And so that's something that human brains can't do very well. And I would say that one of the interesting things that comes out of this, we might even talked about this a couple years ago, but when we go through this process and we come up with these ideas, all of our disease programs, every disease we work on, we have a KOL. We often connect, with a luminary in that disease area, and we bring them into the projects, and we show them the output of what we have. We're like, look, these are, we say our ideas. Reality is the machine came up with the ideas. What do you think, right? And so part of it is we're going after novel stuff, right? So they tend to say like one of two things. Like one thing is like, like this is an interesting idea. I hadn't thought of this before. Kind of reminds me of something like, okay, like, like seems feasible. Let's try it out. But the other thing they say is they'll look at stuff and they'll be like, no way. Like this is just stupid. Like you are wasting your time. Right. And those are my favorites. We don't do this anymore, but we used to ask people to write down, okay, we've got these 10, these 10 theories, if you will, these 10 different targets. We're going to have these 10 different molecules. We're going to go screen. You disease expert, you tell us which ones are going to work and which are not. And we found out that the disease experts were no better than random in picking the winners, which I think is very sort of telling about how little we know as humans, inspecting literature and sort of the capacity of the human brain to sort of understand against, again, these massive sources of information, what's relevant and what's not. And so, we've had a number of very exciting and very pleasant surprises, where we see through the screening process, we see signal, and ultimately, we get down into in vivo studies, these gold standard models where we compare against standard of care, right? And then we see in many cases, our molecules are showing stronger signals of either efficacy or maybe similar efficacy signals, but stronger signals of safety. And that tells us we've got something that's really compelling and worth moving forward.
Yeah, I mean, I always find it's a fascinating discussion, when like, again, going back to Joel and Alzheimer's and him pointing out to people at NIH that, well, herpes simplex 2 might be, right? And everybody was like, nah, you're crazy, right?
Yeah.
And he says, hey, listen, here's all my data, you run it and you see what you find, right? And so I think NIH now is sort of thinking about how to come at this a different way, but I always find that fascinating is like, you've got this incredibly complicated system and you're looking at this narrow little window that you are an expert at. And how could it not be that anything outside that window influences what's happening in that? It's sort of mind-boggling. And now that we have computational capabilities to sort of, I don't want to say brute force, but I feel like 10 years from now, we're going to look back and go, damn, that was brute force. We have something much more elegant now. But a way of looking at these and looking at the complexity and seeing that a pathway that we never even thought of has an influence on this disease is fascinating to me. How the whole industry isn't moving in this direction much faster is sort of always mind-boggling to me. But I understand that, you know, your expertise wasn't necessarily drug discovery from day one.
Well, yeah, look, I think computer scientists, as we've gotten, I think, more involved in this industry, we represent disruption. It's a very different way of thinking. And disruption takes time, and industries, resist disruption, quite frankly. One of my startups I did, Nolan Bushnell was the chairman of the company. If that name doesn't ring a bell, not only did Nolan start Chuck E. Cheese, which he's very famous for, but before Chuck E. Cheese, he founded a little company called Atari. And before Atari, the video game industry didn't exist. Okay. Right. And so when I first met Nolan, we went out to dinner, and like any, person who's just, in awe of such an amazing technologist and a pioneer, for that industry, we went out to dinner. I'm like, so Nolan, right? I'm just like this eager young man. Tell me the stories of the early days of Atari. And at the time, at our startup, we were working on some fundraising. And so he told me this story. So you have to understand, like, let me set the scene, right? This is like maybe late 60s, early 70s. And I'm sure maybe Nolan's going to listen to this podcast. I'll send it to him, and he can get the story right, because this was a long time ago. We had this conversation, so I'm sure I'm going to get the details wrong, but the core of the message is there. Anyway, so it's around that time period, and video games don't exist. Humans have never seen them. They don't know what they are. Okay.
Right.
And so he's working on this. He's building Pong or whatever he's building over here in Sunnyvale, next town over, and he's chatting with people in, the game industry, both that in air quotes, the game industry. I don't recall who it is specifically, but let's just say it's Parker Brothers, right? So he's sitting down with the fine folks at Parker Brothers. He's like, man, I've got this new exciting innovation. It's going to change the gaming industry as a whole, and just, personal entertainment. And I've combined computers and games, and I've made this thing. It's called a video game. It's going to be the next huge thing. Okay. And so he's telling me, the guys from Parker Brothers, whoever it is, are like, Nolan, right? Sitting him down, hand on the shoulder. So first of all, games are made out of paper and cardboard. Okay. But more importantly, games, you sit around the kitchen table with your family and friends, and it's a social experience where you interact. And the point of the game, is this social gathering. And you're telling me you're going to make a thing where people are going to stare at a television, and that's going to replace, this whole sort of social ritual that is games? Like, Nolan, you're an idiot. Get out of here. Right.
Right.
And of course, we know what he did. He built Pong. He put it in a bar over in Sunnyvale, and people lined out the door pumping quarters into it, and the rest is history. But that story, I think, really resonates for me, because to your point, like, looking forward to the future, like, the video game industry is today, it's like an obvious thing. If I'm not mistaken, it pulls in more revenue than Hollywood does, from movies. Like, it is just part of our culture. It's just part of our experience. It's part of, growing up, kids playing, video games. And before, Nolan came around, like, people couldn't understand this what's now obvious, this thing that was coming. And I think in a very similar way, as a computer scientist who's worked on a variety of industries, and Mark Andreessen, right, one of our investors, Andreessen Horowitz, like, talks about all the things you used to buy at Radio Shack that are now just in software, right? Like, all this stuff has been replaced. And I think in a very similar way in this industry, it's tough to imagine what it is until you already have it, right? And so for someone who, started this company many years ago, and I've been very consistent in, like, my belief systems and what we do and, like, our output. And I've gone from, in the very early days, everyone said, like, this will never work, you're a fool, right? Very similar to the Nolan thing. Or these days, maybe like half the people say that, maybe a little more than half, right? But, like, all that's happened is the passage of time. And what's happened in that passage of time is people are starting to get a hint of what's possible, and I also was having a conversation actually the night before last. I was chatting with an investor who was talking about sort of his belief system of what's happening. And so you look at, recent IPOs like Relay and Schrodinger, of course, the guys at Roivant are doing extremely well. And he was sort of saying, because of the acceleration of technology, people are coming out of nowhere and they're challenging, these large established, pharmaceutical companies. Now, they have the advantage of products on patent for many, many years, and it's going to take a while to disrupt. But this investor who I think was very thoughtful was sort of saying like this disruption is coming with so much momentum behind it. And we believe, you know, some of these what look today like small sort of innocuous players are really going to disrupt the field and make huge changes in the pharmaceutical industry as a whole. So that was an interesting perspective, just kind of tying all those pieces together where, you know, innovation and disruption, it comes from the outside, right? I'm definitely an outsider, right? Like I built mapping systems and telephony systems and advertising networks, and here I am making drugs. It's kind of a weird transition from that standpoint, but it's highly connected to this idea of bringing disruptive ideas into a rather entrenched industry.
No, and I mean, look, I try to read everything I can get my hands on from the tech side. I'm scanning constantly. I was listening to the guy who has the title Futurist for Paramount Pictures.
Oh,
about what they're
like
working
an awesome
on.
Job. I want that.
Right. Yeah. I was thinking about that too. I'm like, oh shit, maybe I can transition my next life into the Futurist. That's a really cool title. But
I love it. Yeah.
But hearing about, you know, all these different sort of plays moving forward, you know, using, you know, augmented reality and things of nature of how you collaborate and so on and so forth, and you superimpose that. I take all of these things and I try to superimpose that on our world. And you can see the ball moving forward in ways that to someone who's only looking in the field cannot see. It's like looking through one hollow lens and you can't see the rest of the picture that's developing around you. And, you know, I find it fascinating that the status quo can't see that the world is changing at a rapid pace. Now, I do believe that we're going to look back at COVID, and I know it's a negative for all intensive purposes, but I think from a moving things forward from a technological perspective, I think it's been a huge shot in the arm for remote monitoring of patients, for telemedicine, for all these other areas. I think it's moved it forward 5 to 10 years. And I have to believe things that you're working on are now should be even of more interest to a therapeutic company. Because if you can't get everybody in the same room to do the experiment, how do you do the experiment to move it forward faster?
Yeah, no, look, I think those are excellent observations. I think COVID is definitely an interesting time to sort of see how technology helps influence society. And you're right, like, so here we are. I mean, the last time we did a podcast, we did it together, right? We were standing together. I think, where were we?
We were at the Harvard Medical Center. Yes.
We were, you know, in a hallway together and, you know, around a table recording and you know, we're thousands of miles away together. I've got a fancy fiber optic cable, you know, coming into my house. I don't know what you have on your end, but like, I see you clear as day, and here we are recording a podcast. Right. And so, right. First of all, how cool is that? Now I recognize like that's something we've probably had for 5 or 10 years, but nonetheless, like the point is, we're still able to put this material together without physically being together. And I think, you know, even in our own company, so Santa Clara County, which is where we live and where our offices are, you know, we were one of the first places in the nation to have detected cases, and so the health commissioner here was one of the first places to put shelter in place, and we knew it was coming because we were connected to some people. And so at our company, we trained everyone on how to use Zoom and Slack, and we had a goodbye party on a Friday. You know, I'm sure we'll see each other again soon. We're not sure when. And we prepped everyone off, and off we go. And the next, you know, Monday we started operating our business completely through, you know, technology, completely through video. And we have not gathered as a group in our office since. This was months and months ago. And throughout this time, in the early days, there's some little adjusting, you know, figuring out how to do this. But like, you know, by and large, like we're operating just as efficiently and moving forward just as we were before we were in that physical space together. Now, I will certainly say there is value to being together with people and sort of the there's more than what just happens during the meeting time and building personal relationships. But it's a big question, like, are we going to be able to function as a company without seeing one another? And the answer is yes, right? And I think one of the things that COVID has done for that type of question is like, okay, does this whole, remote work stuff, function? I think it was Melissa Meyer many years ago, like said, very famous decree, everyone at Yahoo shall come into the office at Yahoo. There will be no more remote work. And here we are now with all these big tech companies and small ones like ours. Everyone's working remotely, and it's kind of working out, right? So,
well, it's interesting, right? I mean, Google just announced, right, that nobody's coming back to the office until July.
Till next summer, no problem. Yeah, next year, yeah. So, like, I think what that means is, so now, people are, in many industries, not all of them, able to work from home. We have people in our company, my chief of staff, she was born in Mexico. She's been living in San Francisco. She just said to me the other week, she's like, I'm in this rather expensive apartment in San Francisco to leave. They got the internet in Mexico, and it's odd. She asked me, she's like, is it cool if I go to Mexico? And I'm like, why not? Like, I'll let you know when there's a chance we'll be getting back together in the office, but like, go for it. And she's like, awesome, I'm going to go live like a queen, right? Like and so that recognition that, even physical places, like why do you need to be in a high rent area if you can just, do your job effectively somewhere else? So anyway, so all these things are kind of unraveling. And I think to some of your points on medicine and healthcare, I think the other thing that's happened is people are very nervous to go in and see their clinician because they think, right, well, there's other people around who might have COVID. I don't want to get that. And so, yeah, like the whole telemedicine piece of it is taken off. But the whole point is like using technology, using the internet, using, like the technologies we're using right now to interact with folks on all sorts of levels, whether that's professional, whether that's, whether that's patient care, all of that, the barrier has just dropped, right? And so I think it will be interesting to see post-COVID world what it does. Like, are people all going to like get back into the office or not, right? Or are people going to think every time they're not feeling well they need to go see their doctor, or they're going to go, I think I'll do that mobile app thing that I did before, last year because it kind of worked and I realized I don't have to drive anywhere. And yeah, I think those events help push innovation forward for sure.
So stepping back to where you are, do you think you're from a time frame perspective, you're moving the ball forward faster by compared to, say, a traditional process, 6 months, a year, 2 years? What's a wild guess?
I would say on average, if you're going to do a completely de novo process from scratch, we're saving about 3 to 4 years. There's a point at which, our processes don't speed things up. And that's as soon as we get the mouse involved, right? Like I can't speed up the tumor growth in the mouse. I can't speed up the, activity of the potential medication to, inhibit that tumor growth. I can't speed up the, the histology and all the work that happens post that and all the activity that you need to do. And rightly so, right? To carefully prepare for an IND filing, because, when you get to the point where you're going to test something in humans, you want to be absolutely sure you're being safe about it, and you're doing something that's worth the risk that you put onto your clinical trial patients. So all of those processes, they don't necessarily speed up. I think really where we're about speed in the discovery process, I think the real opportunity post-discovery is efficiency, not necessarily speed. But with patient trial selection, for example, finding the right population, finding the responders, being able to do things where maybe you don't have to have as large a group, in your clinical trials. An example, those are things where now efficiency and cost efficiency become, I think, some of the values of what you can do with computational methodologies, but you can't really speed up, a preclinical study or a clinical trial just to the nature of the biology and the time. And so that's how I see it. The first half is about speed, and the second half is maybe it's more than half, but the rest of it is about just efficient use of capital to get the results that you're looking for.
Although I do see, trying to look at the entire value chain, there are companies using computational methods to sort of find patients faster, make sure they fit the trial better. Remote clinical trials are becoming more of a thing. So I think we're seeing computation sort of fill in gaps that can be filled in by technology advancement. So I do see the process shortening over time from end to end, which I'm hoping also translate to a lower cost at some point from end to end.
Yeah, look, I think there's definitely efficiencies to be gained throughout the whole thing. I think, again, if you're looking for, we take some things that normally would take years. This is something we used to say early in the company and we got critiques, so we stopped saying it, but it's still true, right? Like we take that very early portion of just understanding the biology, which can take many, many years. And the computation does it in a couple of minutes. And so that sort of stuff, that's a dramatic, multifold, increase in speed. And I'm not saying that some of the things you talked about won't increase, I think, the efficiency from the speed perspective, but it's not going to take a process that takes 4 or 5 years and turn it into 3 minutes. That's for sure.
No,
right?
No, absolutely. And it begs the question of, we need to rethink how we teach biology, right? And understanding these things, right? It's, I remember doing a lot of reading, a lot of textbooks, a lot of experiments. I feel like most of that now I'd be sitting in front of a terminal and combining pieces of data and coming at the whole learning process differently than when I was learning.
Yeah, that's an interesting thing to poke at. Let me share some thoughts here, and I don't know if they'll be interesting if they're congruent with some of the things you're thinking. I think let me gather my thoughts. Okay, so when I'm screening, when I'm interviewing a software engineer to work on my team, and of course, now that people are going to listen to this podcast, they're going to know what the answer is before. But one of the things I ask them is I say, man, like imagine it's, whatever, the 1700s, the 1800s, computers don't exist, technology doesn't exist. You're still you, right? You've been magically teleported back in time. What do you think you'd be doing? And it's very interesting. And I get these answers like, oh, I'd be a school teacher. I think that would be an awesome thing, or whatever. I would be a musician, all this stuff. And then this is like the hook. And then I go, well, why aren't you a school teacher now? And then the answer is, well, because software pays better, right? Which is a reasonable thing. But what it says to me is that there's a lot of people in the field that don't do it because it's their passion or their interest or it's something that really excites them. It's like, yeah, I can make some money at this. And I think the best computer scientists and the best engineers I know, they are tinkerers. They're people who, and they're also creatives, right? Because software is got this this artistry to it, where it's the tool set is so wide, and you can do so many things with it that like the people that are really into software, and another great question is like, so what do you do in your free time to see if they actually write software for fun? Which, by the way, while I'm chatting with you over here on this window, I'm writing some software to do something personal, unrelated to work. But like there's I think a connection between really becoming an expert in your domain and also just like truly enjoying it, truly enjoying the skill and the trade and that sort of thing. And I think that there's a personality that science attracts, people like me, computer nerds, right, who really enjoy software. And there's different personalities that attract different things. And I think it's really hard to find someone who really enjoys, like the biology and the sciences and software together. I mean, when I was studying this in school, most of my classmates were medical doctors. They had a medical degree, probably like 75% of them. And so they're trying to learn software, right? And a few of them like really connect with it and they really enjoy it and it's their passion. And I think those are also the people that just produce like the coolest stuff. Like you did the podcast with Jake, I think maybe a few months ago.
Yes,
I sent you a note on that. So Jake, I met him at Stanford. He was in one of my classes, but like, he's one of those guys, right? Who's like this biologist, software tinker dude. And like, we would get together and like philosophize on stuff. And like that's the kind of person you want to see, like just making big changes in the industry. And like, he's
Right.
obviously doing that. But my point in that is there was a bunch of other people in those classes, and there's some other people, like Tim Sweeney is another one who I think actually was a surgeon originally. Now he's doing informatics, just doing like super cool stuff, combination of CF1.
Right.
There's a bunch of other people in those classes who are kind of like medical doctors, or like, I should learn software because it would be good, kind of thing. And I don't want to call anyone out, but I remember like one person, it was a project due or something like that, and it was before class, and she was complaining. She was like, I can't do this. I spent my whole day yesterday working on the software, and I couldn't get it to work, and it's like it's using up all my time. And she hated it, and I also spent that amount of time, and I'm like, this is cool, like this is fun, like this is
Right.
putting this thing together. And so I think taking people and saying, look, as a biologist, now you have to learn software, and we're going to pound you over the head over it. Like, I don't know if that actually will transform. And look, and maybe it'll light something in someone who didn't know that would be of interest to them. But I think it's really got to be connected with the personality and sort of like the enjoyment of the person. And I don't know if that happens that late. I think it can start much earlier. Look, I first touched a computer when I was geez Louise, it's like when the Apple II came out. I mean, Apple had every school got a free Apple II computer, and I was fortunate enough that my parents were able to purchase one. But I was a little kid, and so that's sort of where the passion started for me. And I think that's for whatever it is, whether it's biologists or whether you're working in engineering or whether you're working in financial services, it doesn't matter. I think that exposing really children to software and programming and that sort of stuff, like some are going to connect with it and enjoy it. And I think those are the people that eventually, as they get into different sciences and different disciplines, will use that enjoyment and that skill to do something interesting with computer science. But it's just my belief. I don't think you can take someone at like the college level who's getting into biology and be like, hey, let's
No.
right? It's yeah.
No, but I think, and what I meant by teaching it in different ways, my fundamental belief is that, everybody should be steeped in software, not necessarily to do it, but to understand it as a process, as a language, because at some point you're going to interact with it. So you might as well understand it, even at the basic level.
Yeah, no, that's fair. That's fair.
And then as you're going forward, if you want to take on different careers, there needs to be a combination of these two, or you end up like when we were at Applied Biosystems, you're like, okay, get the computer science guy and get the IT guy together and get the biologist together, put them in a room and, have them make something. And nobody could understand what anybody was saying, right? For the first like 3 or 4 years. But on the other side, you're absolutely right. I mean, my family is always saying like, you're working all the time. I'm like, well, look, let's get something straight. Every once in a while, there's a pain in the backside I need to deal with that I don't want to do. But for the most part, I mean, I'm in a kid and candy store every day. There's something new every moment. And I'm like, this is the coolest thing ever. And I get to be involved. That's not work. That's just fun.
No, look, and that's an awesome place to be, and I think part of what drives innovation and change in industries are people who are really just connected with that passion, and they have the drive as well. Like there's something behind them that really inspires them to go and do something and try to do something new. I think innovation it's a hard game. I mean, as I often say, I've done these startups, I wish I could say everyone was an astounding success. One of them was bought by Apple, which, I always like to talk about. I don't always talk about the one that, we raised, $24 million. The whole thing exploded. I guess every startup is spectacular. This one was spectacular in the,
Yes.
in the negative sense. But, I think you also, for people that, want to change the world and change industries, it's tough to describe, but like it's not necessarily the grit, but it's like it's the enjoyment of like the challenge. And I think Michael Jordan has some great quotes about all the times I missed, as opposed to all the times I was successful. And I think part of changing industries is like you just hear no all the time. As I was saying earlier in the podcast, in the beginning of this company, with a few exceptions, it was certainly nice to have BJ and Andreessen be like, oh yeah, this is it. I'm giving you some money. Let's see what happens. But like everyone else I talked to was just like, no, no, no. And there's
right.
I think there's a type of person as well who just sort of listens to that. And I don't hear no, I hear not yet or not now, right? Like it just,
Right,
just
right.
sort of my reality distortion field kind of puts words in people's mouths that they're not saying. And I think all those things kind of combine together, right? We've been talking about these different things. I think there's the passion for the technology and just sort of having like the personal interest in sort of those things. There's the again, the feeling like it's not work, it's something that brings you joy and it's really engaging, that sort of thing. And then I think that final piece is just people who enjoy a challenge and doing something very difficult, and the no's don't discourage them, the no's only encourage them in some cases. I think it's kind of the combination of all those things that make industries change. And I think kind of the theme we've been talking about is just sort of changes in life sciences and healthcare in general. I think finding people like that and really tapping into them and giving them resources to go try some things and to sometimes fail and to sometimes succeed. I think that's what really is going to make the biggest movements in our industry, right? Because those are the risk takers, those are the pioneers, those are the visionaries who want to do something new. And I think the more we do to help support and encourage people who have that mindset and that way of thinking and that sort of endless energy to go out and do something is something that's only going to make the world better, and therefore we should embrace it as much as we can.
No, I totally agree. And the tough part is finding those people, right? They're not falling off trees. I can tell you, at least with after all these years of all the people that I've interacted with, most people are just too nervous to take that path. But I try to encourage them to do it.
Yeah, look, I think that's where, startup incubators and places where people who don't know or maybe a little timid can come. I mean, I'm deeply involved with StartX. I'm a judge there. I sometimes lead the neighborhoods, and it's often students that are coming out of Stanford who have got an idea for a company and they just don't know where to begin. And what StartX does is it's a community, right? It's a support system. It's a whole set of other people in similar circumstances, whether they've had some success or they're very early themselves, to work together as a group and as a community to help people get there, right? And so I think that type of thing, whether it's a startup incubator or that sort of thing, I wish we did more on the governmental level to encourage innovation and put pieces in place where young bright people come out of school and they've got a choice. Man, this is, I think I've said this before in your podcast, but if I did, I'll repeat it again. But like one thing does it annoy me is people will graduate with a degree in biomedical informatics. They literally learned how to use computers to solve medical problems and save people's lives. Okay, and then the likes of Google or Twitter or Facebook will show up with a wheelbarrow full of cash and say,
Right.
hey, you know how to write software, that skill's in short supply. Why don't you come with us and, we'll deliver movies to people. And not that there's anything unethical about delivering movies to people, but you've literally just learned how to save lives. And as, a student who's coming out of school and they're just sort of like, geez, what do I do next? And there's this big impressive paycheck and they've probably got some debt and they're thinking about, geez, I want to, buy a house, start a family, all those things that young people think about. It's really hard to go, yeah, instead, I think I'm going to just eat, tuna fish sandwiches and sleep on my friend's couch because I have this idea for a startup. Like, just to be practical, that's not an easy thing to do. And so I think if we did more to help encourage, and by encourage, I mean supply young entrepreneurs and people who want to experiment with the resources, not only the financial resources to operate a company, but so they can have a reasonable existence while they're trying these things out. I think the better off we will be as a society if we put more sort of leverage behind, again, governmental resources to help people like that. I think we could do a lot more innovation as a country and as a nation to improve. Not only we're obviously talking about the medical space, but like all sorts of other things, you know, whether it's materials or aerospace or transportation. I mean,
Yep.
there's so many interesting problems to be solved, that helping entrepreneurs or creating environments where entrepreneurs can grow, I think would be a wonderful thing to do if we could get there as a country.
But I wrote a letter to tech and it got published, I don't know, where in AI Med or something like that, about, you know, begging tech people, like, you need to look at this space because you can actually make money and make a difference, as opposed to if you go to, you know, Facebook or something like that. Like, it's not, no offense to Facebook, but you're really not making a difference in anybody's life. But in the last few minutes here, let's pivot back for a second to the company, what you guys are doing. Where do you guys see the next milestone in, you know, taking the technology forward and the impact that it's going to have? Or is there a particular program that really you're excited about, that it's really moving the needle?
Yeah, that's a good one. So yeah, we act a bit like a mid-sized farmer, right? So we've got a whole portfolio. We've got 18 diseases currently under active development. Now, a number of those are through these licensing deals with pharma. But like I say, there's a dozen or so that we're moving forward internally. And of course, you know, what seems to be the most promising programs are always the one where the uncertainty is the lowest. So the ones that have been around the longest, which we know the most information about, seem the most promising, but there very well could be an earlier program that's actually way more promising, but we just don't know yet, right? Because we haven't gotten that far. But we've got these days 5 programs in medicinal chemistry, right? So we've screened things down. We've got a lead. That lead has been tested in multiple preclinical studies. We see its performance is better than standard of care if it exists, or maybe against you know, positive control might have been like a phase 3, you know, clinical candidate if there is no FDA-approved molecule in that disease area. So we've got about 5 programs like that where we're moving forward from the medchem perspective. We've got 5 more programs right behind those where we have screened things down and we see early signals of a potentially, you know, more appealing therapeutic than what's available or what's about to be available. But we have some more work to do to either finalize the selection of the lead molecule or maybe run another preclinical study to you know, get a second confirmation that what we have is truly interesting. So out of those 10, you know, I think in the next few years, it's not clear which one of those is going to pan out and be the most appealing for the company. To ultimately answer your question, I think for us, you know, our next milestone, there's sort of like these credibility milestones as you reach them as a pharma company, like people get more and more serious about you. And for us, the next big milestone is an IND filing. It's not clear when that'll happen. I would say the soonest it could happen, it would be beginning of next calendar year. We do have something that has the potential to be there. But again, as we move forward, we are constantly killing programs too. We have a lot of optionality. And so we're always trying to figure out which one is the most lucrative to move forward with. But I think certainly within the next year or two at the latest, we will get to that IND milestone. And I think that's going to be a huge inflection point for the company, where now we've gone from being a discovery stage company to being a clinical stage company. And then really all sorts of things change for how you're perceived and, you know, what people think about for your future and a whole bunch of things. So that's what we're focused on as a company, is getting to the IND milestone, not only as quickly as possible, but also to do it with something, the most compelling thing that we can pull forward. And so we've got lots of choices to do that with, and we're optimistic that we'll have at least one, if not 2 of those in the next few years.
Yeah, I was going to say, well, you know, the beginning of the year is not that far away. You know, we've got an election and a few things to get done before then, but it feels like it's right around the corner.
Yes, time does seem to fly, but yeah, it's still summer. But indeed, right? It's I think, well, and certainly in the warp speed that we're going at for the life science industry, yeah, like, you know, 6 to 9 months is insanely fast. Where maybe in other industries that seems like you know, winter. Geez Louise, why does it take that long? But obviously, very quick for this industry.
Oh yeah, I mean, I keep telling people, I mean, the difference between evolution and revolution is just a measure of time.
No, I love it. I might have to steal that and use it later.
No, feel free. I
Excellent.
mean, it's a quote in the book because it's true, right? If things take a long time, people call it evolution. If it happens overnight, it's a revolution, right? So. Um, Look, it was great to catch up. I'm really excited for you guys. I mean, having these periodic discussions to understand the arc of the change is always fascinating to me, and I just don't understand how everybody can't wrap their head around the impact that this technology is happening. And whenever I hear somebody, naysaying or poo-pooing, I'm like, what am I missing? Am I looking at it the wrong way? Sometimes I have to go back and look at a few things to make sure like I'm not, you know, drinking my own Kool-Aid sort
Yeah.
of thing. But
Well, look, let me close with this. So Mark, who I'd mentioned earlier, who's our head of R&D, he didn't just show up one day and say, I want to work here. He actually was a KOL with a company for many years. We'd brought him in to consult on some of the things that we're doing. And so he sort of got like this slow drip of the activity over time. And, finally, he came in one day and we were talking about, I think we were talking about results in lupus. I can't remember what. But, we were talking about that and some other programs, and he recognizes, he sort of knows, like people, they know this, but they kind of come in the office and they see, they're like, man, there's like 18 programs here. It's like less than 20 people, like it's just
right.
this tiny little crew. And so, he's kind of like looking around the office. He's like, this is it, isn't it? I mean, yeah, this is the team, and he knows, right? Because he's been looking at the clinical evidence. And he says to me, man, he's like, I have been waiting to do something special for quite some time. He's like, this is it. I want you to offer me a job. And I was just like this, like a guru to me right now. He wants to work for me. I'm thinking like, what's going on here? And of course, like, are you kidding? Do you want to work here? Yes, we can do that. But kind of part of that discussion was him telling me sort of his evolution of his complete skepticism in computer science and artificial intelligence. And, the way he described it was, he saw computers winning games like chess and Go, but they have defined rules and they have defined outcomes. And he's like, in drug discovery, there are no defined rules. Like every drug that's made to market is its own little story. But not only that, but the moves that people made to get there are not known, unlike a chess game where you know whether or not you're winning, right? And his view was like, there's just no way computers can solve this problem. It's completely unbounded. It's not like playing a game, therefore it'll never work. And so he's had an evolution in his mind as an old school, drug developer who's had lots of success, and he's gone from like highly skeptical to highly supportive. And in fact, we've been working on a video that he's sort of describing this transformation that we're going to get out hopefully in the next few months, to kind of share his story about that transformation. And so I think Mark represents, one of many, sort of leading scientists in the field who, in his case, he's obviously made the transformation from skeptic to full supporter to like, this is now my next career move, is I want to be involved with this. And I think that story and hearing from Mark as we get the video out there about his own skepticism and what convinced him and how things changed and how he came to understand what's possible. I think that transformation is happening all throughout the industry with a bunch of people. And I think that Mark's story will help kind of people understand how he's, sort of perceived these changes, and therefore, will give them some fuel or some ideas to think about how the transformation will affect them. So we look forward to getting that video out there and sharing with people, and then and people can, sort of see it from Mark's eyes and Mark's point of view.
Yeah, please don't, send it to me. I'd love to take a look at it. But, like I said, I read all this stuff in tech and I look at how people are trying to solve problems in completely different areas. And you look at the creativity, as you said, right? Because it is a creative job in a sense. And then I look at how that could pivot into our world. And I think it's just, it opens up a whole opportunity set that the current way that scientists look at the world in our world may not see the opportunity.
Yeah, well, we'll get there. We'll get there.
So, well, it was great to talk to you. I look forward to staying in touch. And maybe one of these days, we had talked about getting together for a beer, but I think we're going to have to wait until this whole thing is over.
Next year, no problem. We will do that.
All right.
All right, my
Excellent.
good man.
Take care.
Great to chat with you.
Bye-bye.